Where do you want the doctor's eyes the whole time, right?
On the patients.
The best founders we've had in our portfolio are those who are students of the market. Think about what part of the business you're really, really good at and what part of the business that you want coaching for. And find an investor who wants to support you in that. Orthopedic surgeons actually suffer 8 times the rate of cancer.
You can't replace part of the brain. Like,
you treat them the same.
Source of truth for the medtech industry.
Who exists with the profits.
Robot understands things automatically.
Number one show in the medtech industry.
So Stryker got ahead of that and changed in the $90 billion company. They had help up high. A lot of things. You stayed in medtech.
With your host, Omar Khateeb.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. Another venture capital and investing episode. I want to tell you a little bit about our guest before we introduce him. So Armen Vidian is a managing director and managing partner actually over at Recode Ventures. And the way we met is the way a lot of my great relationships and friendships happen in this wonderful industry, which is in the bar lobby area at LSI USA in after hours. So
that's right.
Our mutual friend, who is a very good friend of mine, who I love and respect a lot, is Josh DeFonso. And Josh isn't the kind of guy that just hands out compliments, but he, spoke so highly of you. And I think he might be one of the only people that he said, yeah, you should really consider getting Armen on your show. So he told me that. I befriended you, and we've been talking about this for over a year now. And so I'm glad to finally make it happen. So Armen, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
Thank you. Thank you very much. And anything Josh DeFonso has to say must be categorically untrue, good or bad, right? So like that guy, right? No, another fantastic entrepreneur.
Absolutely. Well, before we dive into it and talking about all things venture and investing in medtech, maybe, give us a little bit of background on yourself. I think what's really interesting is that, you spent time both as an operator and now in venture. And so maybe tell us about how you got started. Like first, actually, let's go back to the very beginning. Where is Armen Vidian from? Who is Armen Vidian and how did you get into the space?
Sure. So I am from Southeast Wisconsin, town called Racine, Wisconsin. I'm actually coming up this broadcast from my K through 12 school, the Prairie School in Racine, Wisconsin right now, where I'm visiting. Great place to get an education. I really grew up surrounded by art, technology, music as an important part of my education in a really fascinating and independent school. And I grew up the child of a banker who was frankly more like a venture capitalist for small businesses back in the 70s, who, made loans to small businesses in Racine, Wisconsin in a much less regulated era for banking. And really started in a trailer park home, quite literally himself, until he left the bank 30 years later. And so I kind of has always had that a little bit in my blood since. But of course, growing up in Racine, Wisconsin, like the first thing you want to do when you turn 18 is leave. So I went out east. I did my bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering and French, interesting combination, at MIT, where I really focused on a lot of, as characteristic of MIT, very first principles, very math heavy. And along the way, I kind of did a combination of biomedical. We didn't have a biomedical engineering major at the time, but biology, mechanical engineering, and math, which led me in that combination when I graduated and figured out what I wanted to do. Discovered a program at Stanford, which is now called management science. And that was really a data science, we would call it today, kind of degree where you're applying data, mathematics, psychology, economics, and some programming to go about decisions in an informed way. So yeah, it was really an innovative program for its time. And it's then that I caught the entrepreneurial bug and loved the Bay Area and decided to stay. So after some time in consulting, I joined the medical device industry. And it kind of brought me back to my engineering technical roots after some time in the first .com wave, where we were really looking to apply technology to the ability to buy your prescription drugs online. The very first, you'll remember drugstore.com and all of those way back when, where using your insurance benefits to actually purchase your drug and get it sent to you was a great big deal. So I worked with a company that came out of a health plan, and we were designing the first place where you could go to check your health history and buy your prescription drugs and do all of these sorts of things, which at that time was quite unique. So I'm dating myself a little bit, but it was really an interesting foray to the necessity to integrate technology and medicine together.
Fantastic. And, I saw that you also served in a variety of marketing roles in different medtech companies.
Mm.
How did you go from that to starting Recode?
Interesting. So when I was part of a startup called Evolve, which got acquired by Abbott, one of the things that I noticed, so Evolve had a transcatheter mitral valve repair therapy. It is now, frankly, a breakthrough in treatment for heart failure. Its results in 2018, clinical results, were actually covered on the front page of the New York Times. And this kind of breakthrough. But the road there was encumbered with challenges in clinical trial structure, data collection, identify what it is we wanted to collect and how, and identifying patients for it. Indeed, a lot of medical device companies stumble on their clinical trials mightily. So what I had realized at the time was there's got to be a better way to do this, where we take and harvest the tremendous amount of knowledge we know about patients and use that to identify cohorts that would be most appropriate for a clinical. And I came across my co-founder of a company called Blue Talon. His name is Pratik Verma. And he had an interesting technology, a data federation technology, in order to access disparate data sets according to your rights of access to them across multiple different silos, internal and external to your organization. And it was then that I realized that this can really be applied in healthcare clinical trial design quite effectively. So we and the venture firm that had invested in us, a firm called DCVC, led our financing. And that's how I got my initial start working with venture capital. In addition to the role I had at Blue Talon, I would frequently turn up to look at a lot of the healthcare meets data companies at the time. And this was back in 2011, 2012, something like that time frame. And that's how I got my initial start.
Over at DCVC, did you work at all with Alan Cohen?
Later, he came in about 2019, I think it was. But I definitely know Alan, absolutely.
Small world. Yeah, he was on the show recently. I think both of you are invested in one of the same companies, which was Proprio, correct?
That's right. I had first met Gabe Jones in 2017, and he was building Proprio in its earliest stages at that time. And I really felt that Gabe was a very compelling entrepreneur. He's just kind of one of those people that you want to hand your money to almost regardless and say, just go see what you can do. He also fascinates me in that despite the fact that I don't think his degree is technical, he really dives in deep on all aspects of his customer, the product, the market, the technical aspects of things, really thinking about how AI can be applied to solve operating problems in the medical device industry. And I just really was compelled early on. Followed him and then led the Series A from DCVC, which was a $23 million Series A.
That's fantastic. I guess it's definitely a very small industry, so I love hearing about that. Talking about Recode, what's something that was interesting, one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on the show is that, it's not your typical life science or medtech investor. I mean, you guys have backed a lot of full stack companies with real infrastructure. And I'm wondering, what kind of lens do you bring, let's say, from the tech or consumer world of investing that's missing in traditional medtech VC?
Sure. So let me give a little bit of background on our fund. So I, together with my partner, Vishal Gulati, who himself is a physician and investor at DFJ Esprit, now Molten in the UK, met through a co-investment at a company doing long-strand DNA synthesis in the UK. We had frequent board meetings, probably more frequent than we should have. And I found myself in the UK for board meetings quite frequently. I like attending my board meetings live. I think it's just a much easier reading a room, talking with the entrepreneur, talking with the people who work there. I think it's much better than a Zoom meeting. And so we started to also look at companies in each other's geographies together. And we've been talking about starting a firm for some time. I think what we saw was that a wave cresting in healthcare and in AI, where really we were seeing some of the very first early successes where we were in our respective places, but that a firm needed to be created at the pre-seed, seed, and Series A for companies that are creating unique data sets and then applying artificial intelligence in order to extract that unique information from them to discover drugs, create novel clinical trials, and create technologies that are facing the patient and the physician in order to reinvent our healthcare system in this country and globally. We do invest globally without discrimination. So Vishal is a physician, as I mentioned. He's a clinical research scientist, come venture capitalist, who's very well known throughout Europe and in the US too, increasingly. And I come at it from the perspective as an engineer, as an operator, product management, product marketing, and so forth for a couple of decades. So together, when you bring together those experiences, we are able to guide the entrepreneurs in this space at the earliest stages and with a lot of the pitfalls with our lessons that we've learned along the way. So that's why we felt that it was compelling and important to put together a firm at this time, because we are truly seeing now the second wave of entrepreneurs come along, and it's extremely strong.
We talked a little bit about this, and I'm wondering if you can kind of dive into it, which is, one of the purposes of our show here is, we're trying to market MedTech to the next generation of talent, because, unfortunately, you're in the Bay Area, the smartest people aren't all going into MedTech, right? So we need to change that. And the other side is attracting more capital. I'm wondering, like everybody talks about for MedTech, like reimbursement and regulatory complications and timelines. I wonder, like from your perspective, what's the real barrier that kind of keeps most tech forward investors away from MedTech? And how do we change that?
So thank you for asking. And one of the things I really appreciate about your podcast is you're not afraid to go straight for the jugular on the questions that are truly ailing an industry. And I think that we're never going to fix them if we don't talk about them. And
totally.
So I am really grateful and excited to be on the State of MedTech, because I see you doing that regularly, and it's a conversation that needs to be moved forward.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Absolutely.
Now, after that wonderful compliment, I will go straight for the jugular on this, because again, I think the industry, we need to hear this.
Sure. So I have some perspectives on this. So I'm going to go back in time a little bit to how it is that we have people at tech companies and how it is we have people at, let's say, life science and med tech companies. So when I was in college, I'm just not that old, but I feel like I have to say I'm old, whatever. But we had people who were in mechanical engineering, and certainly the natural sciences even more so, especially biology, chemistry, perhaps a little less so. Those disciplines had almost nothing to do with the computer science department, even at places like MIT. I suppose there were a few people in mechanical engineering who did some computer science, but it was not particularly common. The natural sciences were often pursued by people who didn't like math so much, but loved science. And so, the two groups kind of steered clear of each other, right? So, as such, come recruitment time, you find a lot of people with the life science and engineering degrees pursuing pharmaceutical or medical device companies, respectively, and a lot of the computer science majors moving forward into, of course, Google, Facebook, whatever, right? So you have to understand the DNA of the respective companies that have been created, that an Abbott Laboratories versus a Google might have, right? And as such, you don't have large numbers of people in a medical device company thinking about how technology can be used to solve problems. I noticed this because I came from the .com world, as I mentioned earlier, before I came into the medical device industry. And you notice that when we have a challenge, we throw a person at it. And a company like Microsoft says, okay, how can we use a tool like a Slack sort of tool in order to communicate with each other, and their own version thereof of Slack, of course, in order to make our lives less cluttered and our work more efficient, right? In a medical device company, if you want to do market development, they hired market development people who went forward and talked to more surgeons, in addition to the sales reps and the clinical specialists who were there. So it's not for lack of will to move quickly with the market, so much as the way that a medical device company is thinking about how they need to do that is not how a technical company thinks to do it. The other thing I think we need to think about is how one advances in respective companies, right? If you take a look at larger companies, to understand who it is that advances, take a look at the profile of the CEO, for starters, right? Famously, Google, right? Software engineering background, right? Procter & Gamble, marketing people, right? And if you look at medical device companies, while they certainly invest in R&D and so forth, the division of the company running the show is usually sales. And that's certainly been the case in my experience as well. They're often the most well compensated by far. And they often, because they have the most customer interaction, they have the most sway. And as such, there's a culture created where additional hires in sales and so forth are really emphasized in order to advance. So this is what you have. Now, they are very skilled people. I know that after this podcast, a couple of my friends in sales from the medical device industry are going to call me angrily and say, wait a minute, what you talking about? But I think that we need to think about how the structure of these companies originated in order to understand what the problem is that we need to solve.
100%. I think you're absolutely right, Armen, because we also see this in marketing. We don't have a lot of great marketers in our space because most of them are product management focused. Commercial marketing and like what we normally see in tech and SaaS is sort of an afterthought. And it's primarily because a lot of money and emphasis put on the sales muscle to come in, right? I think even 10 years ago or 15 years ago, it made a lot of sense where you didn't have the complexities that we have today with value analysis committees, hospital systems, et cetera. So it's like, okay, we have a product, hire a team of 10 or 15 salespeople who've done it before. They have a Rolodex of people. They'll go and convert that business. And then once we do that enough, somebody will just take us out. That model worked for a long time, but we're not in those days anymore.
We're not in those days anymore. And so let's break that down even further. So you mentioned marketing, you mentioned how startups come to evolve. In the traditional, let's call it the traditional medical device industry. And by that, I mean implantable valve, transcatheter valve like Evolve was, right? Or a new spinal implant, whatever it is you have, this traditional medical device. They are largely mechanical engineering devices. I guess an exception to that would be defibrillators and pacemakers, where there's sort of a microcomputer within that. Fair enough. But generally, these are mechanical devices that are being implanted. They're often disposables as well. These are very high margin devices. So generally, the way a startup in medical device comes along is it says, aha, we're going to come up with something that is clinically differentiated to solve the problem of mitral valve repair, right? And they determine the market by the incidence and prevalence of disease. It's a known market, right? And then multiply approximate cost by the size of this, and boom, you have your market. And oftentimes what happens is those companies would come along and build the device, and it would almost be outsourced R&D to the medical device industry, right? And then when it got along to a pace where it was looking like a duck, walking like a duck, medical device company would take it out, right? And then the bar of proof started getting higher and higher as, frankly, in things like orthopedics and cardiology, some of the clinical problems were getting solved. So, it had to have clinical trial data. And then it wasn't just clinical trial data, it had to have commercial data. So the amount of financing these companies needed to raise got bigger and bigger until finally it became just untenable for a lot of venture firms in particular, and especially tech-focused venture firms, making so much money on .com this and .com that coming along and doing a medical device company just felt like, oh my God, why would I do all of that? So that is a challenge. And I should say, by the way, at Recode, we invest sparingly in medical devices and only when there's an exception to the rule where there's something about the data and AI that is massively disruptive to CapEx and OpEx in the industry. I'll go more into that as well. But this is how it came to the point where it was just very difficult to invest. And then FDA requirements around some of these started to go up as well. And to be fair, there were some devices that made the market, I won't name names, but that failed to really deliver clinically, and a lot of money was spent on them, right? So this is the challenge that the industry has been enduring. So you mentioned how marketing tends to function in the industry as well. So let's take that apart a little bit, because I've been in both and kind of observed some differences. In a tech company, let's use Slack as a great example. I don't know why I'm bringing that up so much today, but let's bring up Slack. The marketing department, the chief marketing officer, can actually move the market, right? They may get up and say, Slack is going to kill email, right? And, by putting out these messages repeatedly, they might not actually kill email, but people are thinking about how they should be communicating in different ways. And it has significantly altered how it is that we communicate across different groups, right? By the way, this isn't a great example of a company that uses technology to solve a problem. Quite famously, right, they started as a game company. And when that started going down the tubes, somebody said, oh, it's a bummer if the company shuts down because we have this great tool for communicating. And so somebody said, aha, why don't we try that? And Slack was born. So there's just an example of how they're using computation to solve these problems. In a medical device company, it's very different. If I get up and say that my iPhone cures cancer, and if I say make such a claim, I need to back it up, or else I am in a lot of trouble, both with regulatory authorities and my customers, right? You have to back up a claim. So marketing in the medical device industry plays an equally important role to the tech industry, though different. It is more behind the scenes, and frankly, especially in the early stages for a startup, it's much more tactical. Very hands-on with the surgeon. You're showing them how to use the device and how to get the best result, okay? So that's often an important part of it. This has, however, in my mind, led to a challenge in that, look, if I'm, as an engineer, building a device and you need me on hand for all of the cases, then something makes me feel that I haven't truly built a solution, right? I mean, think of it from most tech, right? If I need to sit there with you and I need to show you how to use your iPhone every day, then that's not a complete product, right? So, and I would say the same, I get the same feeling just personally. The devices are great, but personally, I feel like something's missing, right?
I heartily agree with you on that, by the way. Like, I'll never forget, like, when the iPad first came out, there's a story that an engineer somewhere in like South America, they're in some village and somebody handed an iPad to like this 12-year-old who's never seen a smart device. And intuitively, they actually knew to use their finger to open it up and scroll around and everything. And I think that a lot of that lacks in the industry. I'm wondering, like, do you think, so translating what you just said on the product and engineering side to, let's say, the exit environment, especially like for M&A, do you think that our current environment for M&A in the industry supports like true, bold, like shoot for the moon innovation, or is it incentivizing more incrementalism?
No. So again, thank you for asking the go for the jugular kind of question.
I wanted you. That's why I was like, Armen's my man. Like, he's got to be on the show.
Everybody, quick break. If you're a Medtech CEO or a product leader, you're going to want to listen to this. I want you to imagine you're about to have a product launch. You've poured your time, your budget, your reputation into a device you're about to launch. And after all of that effort, your FDA submission, poof, gets rejected because of cybersecurity. This sounds dramatic, but it's actually not. It happens all the time to medtech companies, especially recently with everything being digitized. This happens so often because medtech companies treat cybersecurity as a checkbox when it's now a non-negotiable design pillar. The FDA's 2023 guidance didn't suggest cybersecurity, it demanded it. So if you're not ready with threat modeling, penetration testing, SBOM management, incident response, and airtight documentation, you're not launching, period. And here's what most entrepreneurs don't realize. Scrambling to fix these issues last minute can cost over $250,000 and delay your launch by months, which imagine the investment of getting delayed, right? The more you spend time in review limbo with the FDA is lost revenue, lost market share, and lost investor confidence. And yet, so many founders and entrepreneurs I talk to, they still treat cybersecurity as a postscript instead of a strategic advantage. Now, I've held off bringing this to my audience as a topic until now because there just wasn't a medtech-focused cybersecurity firm that I trusted, and that changed when I found Blue Goat Cyber. They specialize exclusively in medtech cybersecurity. They've helped companies like bioMaru, Inogen, Natera, along with nimble startups to get to market faster with a 100% FDA success rate. I had the chance to meet the founder, Christian Espinosa, and his story really resonated with me. So after he sold his first cybersecurity company, Alpine Security, Christian actually faced a personal health crisis. He ended up in the hospital, and that moment made him realize how vital and vulnerable medical devices really are because a medical device saved his life. So he built Blue Goat to serve medtech CEOs and founders just like you. Whether you're pre-revenue or scaling fast, Blue Goat can offer fixed-free pricing, unlimited retests, and no surprises. This isn't bolt-on security. This is built in from day one. You wouldn't launch a device that hasn't been clinically validated, so why would you risk launching one that's vulnerable to attack? Blue Goat will secure your device, simplify your submission, accelerate your approval, and they'll do it in a way that fits your budget, your timeline, and your team. So here's what I want you to do next. Go to bluegoatcyber.com, schedule a discovery call. They do these amazing calls. They'll do an analysis with you, educate you more, because the cost of waiting
could be everything that you've worked for. So that being said, go to bluegoatcyber.com and schedule that call now. Let's get back to the episode.
One of the reasons why I think tech-enabled devices are so important is because we need that shock to the system. And you mentioned about getting the very best talent to come into the medical device industry. That is the way we do it. But we have to really seriously consider our business model internally with our customers and what it is the problems are that we are solving for them. Full stop. When we take a look at the major companies, and I know they do life-saving work every day, but to be very frank, they're grasping at straws for growth. We saw Abbott buy St. Jude, okay? But when we're thinking about, are there true new self-disrupting breakthroughs, they're few and far between. I have to say, however, Edwards Lifesciences did disrupt themselves with the transcatheter valve versus their implantable valves because interventional cardiologists were doing that versus surgeons, and that was a very tricky line to tread. They did do that very successfully, and they had quite a bit of exponential growth in their stock price. Got to mention that one. But I have to say that generally we have not. And that's the only one I can think of, aside from, of course, the historic intuitive surgical creation, which really invented the term of robotic surgery. But we have not gone for that. I think, though, it's really important that we think about why and perhaps how we got stuck in this spot and what could trigger it going forward. These companies, the medical device companies, including the startups, view themselves as solving a clinical problem. We talk a lot about saving lives. We talk a lot about attending cases and how deeply a patient was impacted. We have these patients come and speak at our sales meetings, right? That is how we view our value add, right? So with that rep standing there for each and every case is seen as a critical part of it. That surgeon, most of my friends outside of the industry never believe this, but they're relying on that rep. That rep will say things like, pull back because you might hit the left atrial appendage right now. That's how involved they are. And most people who aren't in that line of work don't really understand that. However, this has also made the industry uninvestable. Like I said, we do it very few and far between. Why? You have to invest so much in hiring individual sales rep to do so much of the heavy lifting, and they are not cheap. Like I said, they're some of the best paid people in these companies, and it's very difficult to do. Then, of course, there's the regulatory aspect of doing a clinical trial for some of these PMA devices that is very expensive as well. But when we see that people need to see the commercialization, that just compounds it. So the size of the exit gets capped in traditional medical device companies by the incidence and prevalence of disease. And, there's a tremendous amount of investment that goes in. And even, unless you get to the later stage, when you're getting a smaller multiple, it's really tough for investors to make money in that space. Where it's tough for investors to make money, there's less investment.
Do you feel like for the one thing I do like about medtech compared to other industries, that it is a pretty steady Eddie industry, and that there's like more, despite the problems as there is a little bit more of a clear path to either IPO and or acquisition than, say, compared to like vertical SaaS or tech. Like in that world, like random example, like Pinterest, it took like 18 years for them to IPO, right? And so it's a little bit different. But that being said, do you feel like when you think about your LPs, right, and the fund, do you feel like most LPs would be more interested in investing in a vehicle or a company that is going to get acquired within, let's say, a period of 5 years and have like a 2 to 3x return versus waiting 10 years and having like a 10x?
Our fund is a 10-year fund. So, we want to see big outcomes. That's a 2-3x is not what I'm hoping for. Absolutely not. I think it's interesting you bring up a good point in that medtech healthcare investors generally take their risk on the clinical stuff, rolling the dice on a clinical study. The business model end of it, well, what do you mean? Like, we're going to hire some sales reps and they're going to go sell it. Now we have the clinical data for it. All you do is you hand it to somebody and they're there for the cases. Tech investors are the other way around. Clinical trial risk, are you kidding? However, business model risk in reinventing a market or expanding one, now that they do. For example, when I was at DCVC and then again at Recode, I led the Series A and Series B of a company called Caption Health, which I had been following almost since the day at DCVC. And Caption Health was reinventing cardiac ultrasound into a simple procedure anyone can do. Its indication was for medical assistants and above, but really anybody could do it. In fact, you mentioned Alan Cohen. I took his wife to the company, and actually Alan did it faster than she did. I hope she doesn't call and kill me. But because he had never touched an ultrasound wand before, and he did it in about 6 minutes. Got a diagnostic, 4-chamber view of the heart. And when you think about that, it means we can expand the market beyond just ultrasound sonographers, right? And so what we look at is, how do we then create an app store cafeteria for other organs, the liver, lungs, and so forth? And then you add clinical interpretation measures like peak flow gradient, so forth and so on, ejection fraction, combination of those, and you pick and choose what you want. That's inventing a new business model, but that isn't what traditional medtech does. Right?
Traditional medtech looks at like an incremental improvement to hopefully get bought, which I think I'll pick on that space. But like if you look at the robotic spine arena, like I don't know, there's like 10 different spinal robots, and they're all doing roughly the same thing in the same part of the procedure, and that's it.
Yes. So this is actually a great question. When you look at all these robots, what they do is called navigation. And navigation is more for the intent of implanting a screw in a certain location, right? Why do they care about that? Because putting the screw in the correct location means more screws get sold. And those screws cost a heck of a lot of money. That's where the street is evaluating them, right? However, reinventing this whole process with surgical guidance is a company called Proprio, which you have heard me talk about many, many times and how much I love this company. As mentioned, I love that at DCVC, and then we came in again from Recode. And what's so special here is that I believe that as Tesla was to the automotive industry, that Proprio is going to be to the medical device industry. And I think it's really important that we think about why. If I may go on for a minute, because venture capitalists, we love talking about our portfolio companies. So you got me going. So here we go.
No, that's why I want you on.
That's right. Here we go. So think about Tesla for a moment. The reason why no one's been able to catch up to them is because their competition, as we just discussed, is not wired to build an AI native company. Because again, they don't have that personnel there. And
or on the manufacturing side too, by the way,
just on the manufacturing side, right? So they don't have that capability. They're not hiring, 6-7 figure AI engineers at Abbott in order to build that. And it's also, again, with their sales model, they're not looking to disrupt the role of the rep in there, even though it's what's causing a lot of cost. They have a lot invested in that, and they do want to move very quickly. But it's a very human-driven process. Now, there are sales reps at Proprio, obviously. But what Proprio is creating is a surgical guidance technology with real-time data about the surgical field in front of the surgeon's eyes and creating that smooth, beautiful experience that we all experience with iPhones every day. And the clinical outcomes thus far have been great. And the experience that surgeons are having is amazing. And they're going to come out with some additional products coming out soon to further that.
I'm wondering, on that note, and again, by the way, it's totally okay. Like when I have investors on, I want you to talk about your portfolio companies. When you think about some of the most promising med tech or tech-enabled medical device companies, what kind of traits do they have from, let's say, product design to go to market? Like if you can kind of share a little bit about that, because part of the thing is this show is, we do two things on the show. We entertain, but we also educate. And so part of this is that I want founders I know there's a lot of founders who are going to listen to this because they want to hear from you. But I want them to also start getting inspired by a new way of thinking and acting. So what do those traits look like for these companies?
The traits of the founders of the companies of
both.
So I think that the best founders we've had in our portfolio are those who are students of the market. One problem that we're now seeing solved with portfolio companies is it's not just your data and your AI, it's thinking about who your customer is and how they buy. So the best entrepreneurs, they know more about their market, they know about what pains their customers, and they have a deep empathy for it, right? So that above all is the most important thing to me. The data creation, the AI, that's your moat, okay? But without understanding what's motivating somebody to buy, what exactly is it? What are the kind of margins they experience at a hospital and why? What motivates them? I can get to that. But really thinking about that. I also think that in response to your question about why come into this, it is really hard to create a technology that saves the life of a patient. I think the early entrepreneurs in the space experience that very painfully when biology does not cooperate with your engineering. But to actually get there, and that feeling of knowing that a patient has had their life changed because of something you built is far, far greater than helping websites work better. I just, in my opinion, that it is, I mean, I've been at meetings where, patients have been, explaining how a technology has affected them, and people cry. I mean, wholeheartedly cry. And that's not a feeling that you get, making ads on websites. So I think that's something, if you're looking for, that's a reason to come into this. But we also I feel like we need to have two different conversations, to the tech crowd and to the medical device crowd. When I talk to my medical device friends, I say, there is so much that AI can do to make you much more lightweight, to make the industry investable. In fact, if there's anything that I want your audience to come away from today knowing, it's this. There is a lot of talk out there about how, is AI going to cause me to lose my job, right? Is AI going to take over from what I do? And for the medical device industry, I would say this. Because there isn't AI in computation, because it's largely not been in there, you've already lost jobs, because we haven't been thinking about how we reinvent what we do. It's now incredibly expensive to come to market, and people are not investing in it. So the circle of companies, which is outstanding in that field, is very small. And in the tech world, because they're doing that, really big. So we've got to think about the opportunity that is expanded when we reinvent our model. That I think is the go ahead.
No, I completely agree. And you're the first person that actually put it that way. And you're absolutely right, which is because we haven't thought about implementing and adopting these new technologies in ways, we've already lost jobs as a result of people not wanting to invest in the space, Right. And I think the other side of it is like, we need to bring in more capital so that there are certain like moonshot projects that are not really like moonshots. Moonshot used to be like, it's going to be a big goal. We're going to reach it, but we're going to get there. And now moonshot, I feel like a lot of times is like, oh, it's never going to happen. We're going to try anyway. And I feel like I think about what Peter Thiel taught. Like he said this like a decade or so ago, which is like, in the 70s, we were promised like flying cars and a cure for cancer. And we just have like, we got 140 characters, right? And so,
yeah, that's right.
Yeah. And so I think like what I love most about this industry, I don't want to mention any specific clients my agency's working with, because like other ones are gonna be like, why didn't you mention us? But what I love is like, now we're getting into a space of medtech where there's a lot of really cool devices coming out that are providing interventions and practically cures for things that were normally done by pharma, and I feel like that's the future, which is, I want to get to a point where it's like some imaging is done. It's like, hey, historically, Omar, you've had a history of, let's say, really bad shoulders, right? And so your shoulder is going to be shot by the time you're 70 years old. We're going to just replace it from now with this medical device. Like, great, let's just do that, right? Or your heart or eyeballs or whatever it might be. But the only time we're going to get there is like if we bring in meaningful capital and, more importantly, the talent and the technology that enables that kind of stuff, and not these little incremental improvements, because those companies are like, let's just face it, are not going to end up getting bought. Who's going to buy them?
So, well, incremental improvements require a lot of investment for a small outcome.
Right.
So, I mean, incremental improvements are what big companies are good at, right? And incremental improvements are important at a certain time and place, so,
You remind me of something. I want to share something that a founder told me. It's a young founder who came into Medtech, and she described this to me, and I'm wondering, is this her experience, or would you agree with it? She said that like coming into Medtech, what's interesting is like, it's a very sort of closed off community in the sense that you have this group of execs who worked at XYZ strategic for 10 or 15, 20 years. Then they leave and they start like little companies, and then they have some kind of like native knowledge base of like what they got to do to like build this company and then sell it off. Right. And a lot of the industry is just like that. And so it's just very hard to break in, raise money, and then have success. Would you agree with that?
I agree with that totally. I think that they're, unlike in tech, right? I mean, we invest in young founders all the time. And in strategic, I mean, they're highly educated, have PhDs, but they're young. And what's so interesting, and we saw this in pharmaceutical industry, together with my friend James Hardiman, we led Recursion at DCVC, and I did Accelera. These companies, led by young people, and they're coming in and disrupting it very well, and we're getting new treatments because of it. Medtech has been slower to look at this. It is much clubbier. That founder is correct. Frankly, that's why I think that a lot of these founders come to firms like Recode, because we welcome them and know that their potential is enormous. I mean, when Charles Cadio and Killian Klupsel at Caption were saying, we have a way to make it super simple to do an ultrasound, nobody in the industry was thinking about, what if we make this stupid easy to do? How can technology answer that for us? But if we don't go after those kinds of entrepreneurs, we're not going to know. Likewise with Gabriel Jones at Proprio, you're looking at something where you don't need the kind of rep support, and hence can be much lighter. I was just talking to their head of commercial yesterday, who was saying that you only need about 2 cases with somebody there with you to really just be on your own. And we're talking about degenerative spinal cases, right? And you're off on your own from surgeries that take 9 hours to under 6, conservatively. Wow. In the medical device, that's because they have the technology in front of them. When I was in the medical device industry, the typical, I'd say average is more like 40 to 50 before you could be on your own. And even after that, that rep is still there for every case well into the hundreds. So, I mean, that has the ability to make us lighter, expand the market beyond a few core hospitals into ASCs, ambulatory surgical centers. That's where we can find that these technologies go. And when the market gets bigger, the outcomes get bigger, right? So that's why I think that there's such a tremendous amount of potential, but we've got to keep an open mind as to who can lead it.
Right. I wonder, like, when you talk about that kind of future, do you feel like there's a world where some medtech companies can be these, we could call it like a full stack kind of like integrated software, hardware / biological science company? Like, like really building a true platform. Like, what would that look like? If you kind of let your imagination run with it, what would that world look like?
Yeah. So I think that the hardware has to really be led by the software. I say this hanging my head low as a mechanical engineer, my computer science friends laughing at me all the way. But truly, that has to be the case where, the amount of manipulation of hardware, let me put it to you this way. It should look a certain way. For the customer, in other words, they shouldn't be focused on manipulating robotic arms or whatever to put it into place. How do I twist this? How do I see around here? No, they should be focused on the patient. They should be looking to see if they're getting the result they want. That's when it's seamless, and that the hardware falls into the background and the software is doing the leading. When I say the software is doing the leading, here again, the data comes into play. It's able to do that because it has hundreds of thousands of cases in its database, and not just one rep standing there and saying, I've done so many of these cases, listen to me, right? I mean, which would you want, right? So that's how we have to think about it. These companies are often built, though, in starting from the ground up with hardware and software engineers on the ground floor of the company. I think that when we think about this, the problems that I've seen arise, it's because it starts as kind of a software company, and then they say, well, we need to hire some hardware engineers because, I guess we need to build the hardware. And there's kind of a caste system that emerges from that, and that's not great, right? We need, thinking with across those disciplines to really build product effectively. So, we've got to look at it that way. I think that, it includes data collection with unique technologies to be able to capture the data during the surgery. It has to have an analytic component, and it has to have a cloud storage component in order to keep and maintain the data. And I think that those are significant parts of it. And then the hardware becomes something manipulated by that in order to guide a successful outcome.
Yeah. Something I want to prompt you on and go to, I don't know if you remember offline, you and I were talking about,
It was probably at the bar again.
it was probably at the, no, this one was like when you and I were catching up a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about like, it was right around the time that, and I'll sort of tee you up on this. So it was right when Meta made that, they spent like $100 million to get that one AI engineer out of OpenAI. And I did this post where like, look, Real Madrid paid like 80 mil for Ronaldo. Meta paid 100 mil for this guy. And the idea is that like, from a perspective, 100 mil to Meta, who's got a $1.3 trillion market cap. It's like not even, it's like 0.007% of their market cap. It's a rounding error. But if they're right and they get like a 5% bump, it's like $65 billion in terms of a gain. And so I mentioned that because can you riff a little bit about, we talked about a career, right? And what does that mean in the industry? And then our industry's expectations where I just hear too many, it's mainly from like strategics where they're like, oh, people come and work in medtech and for our company because they're really passionate about patient care. I'm like, hey, that's great, guys. I was like, but people got to get paid too.
So something I often say is, look, I got this advice really super early in my career. A job is something you do for somebody else, but a career is something you do for you. And that is really true. You might do a job to feed your family, but a career is something that you do when you don't need money, right? And so I think that, very often in the medical device company, as I mentioned, what motivates them is we're going to make it better for patients, right? Well, if that's the only thing you wanted, then there are a lot of ways that you can have impact on patients, right? I don't have to work at a medical device company. I need to sell stuff that makes money and, yes, helps the patient because people are buying it for that reason, but it needs to be a high growth business, full stop, right? That said, right, hey, without medical device companies and pharmaceutical companies, doctors would just be priests, right? But, these companies need to make money for a very good reason.
Right. So I want to bear with me on this like little thought experiment here. I want to show you something. So Kotu did this like AI. Actually, I'll send you this deck. You'd love it. But they did sort of like an AI future like market, keynote, right? So I'm going to share this with you, and I want to sort of pose a question to you. Okay. Let me know when you can see my screen.
I can see it.
Okay. So currently, this is the top 25 tech companies. Okay. So this is the list. All right. We have companies like at the top, you have Microsoft, NVIDIA, et cetera. We don't have any pharma, medtech, nothing. Okay. Now, when they project out to 2030, okay, they call this their Fantastic 40. Breaking into the top 25 is Intuitive, okay, at rank number 21. What's interesting, at least when I looked at all this, is there's no pharma, no bio, just Intuitive. This being said, what I'm wondering is if you're thinking about it for Intuitive, what kind of bets should Intuitive be making? And I'm going to use the Meta example. Meta's like, hey, we'll spend $100 million on this one guy and the team. And if we're right, that's a $65 billion bump in our market. What kind of bets because I feel like when I look at all the strategies, Intuitive is kind of like the one that is a unicorn, has disrupted themselves. I mean, they don't even have technically 4 products, I think, and they're bigger than Medtronic. What does Intuitive do that helps sort of steer the rest of the industry in the right trajectory, if anything?
So let's think about Intuitive for a second. If I were to name healthcare companies that have truly caused disruptive change, you just showed a list of tech companies and the list is infinite. In healthcare, I struggle to get to a number on one hand. I know that one of those, though, is Intuitive. Intuitive invented the term robotic surgery. In fact, what they did, to be fair, is not actually robotic in the sense that we think of it, of like a robot, without a doctor, right?
That's a telemanipulator.
Right, it's a manipulator. And they got hospitals. I mean, I used to visit some of these hospitals to build out rooms, like knock down a wall to put in the Intuitive robot while the surgeon sat there and manipulated the devices from elsewhere. I think that this is an example of really understanding what it takes. Intuitive Surgical almost died 5 deaths, right? There was the lawsuit, there was this, that, and the other thing. I mean, a lot of investors would have given up on it. Kudos to them for sticking with it because look at what has been produced. So they also, at first, they started with cardiovascular mitral repair. That wasn't their hotspot. And it wasn't until they got to gynecology that with scopic procedures, they were able to really find their huge market, opening up new procedures for physicians. So for tech-enabled medical device entrepreneurs, there's a big lesson to learn. You have to start with clinical superiority in your space, because what forces a hospital to buy or a healthcare customer to buy is not the same thing as a fintech customer, right? A bank, Goldman Sachs, makes tons of money. I mean, turns out there's money in investment banking, right? And they will buy new technology like this, right? Because they can afford to do it. A hospital, they operate on thin margins. Despite our notions of doctors making a lot of money, the hospital must be draping money. It's not, so they buy something if it is clinically better, and then they have to, right? So then they will literally break down walls. I think that for Intuitive Surgical, what a company like that needs to be thinking about, first of all, they are in many ways already thinking about it, right? There's our friends, Muriel Thenard over at Intuitive Ventures. They've, invested in a venture capital group. They're taking risks through that. That's great. We need to see more groups like that throughout the industry, by the way, because if I were to name one, strategic, and I don't even think that's actually a strategic group. I think they're their own thing, but don't quote me on that. But that's the one that I work with. So that's something, they're thinking about ways in digital medicine and so forth, and how that they can use data to better enhance the patient and physician experience. But I would say if there's anything, it's with the position they're in, they're able to create the same experience for that doctor that we get every day in working with their iPads. What do I mean by that? Go take a look in an OR. I often like to take I think I took a colleague at DCDC once into an OR to see what it looks like. And people are pretty shocked. And they're shocked because there's tons of technology in the room. It's everywhere. And it's in the way. No one is looking at it. And it's just a pain in the butt. Everyone's huddled over the patient. And then they got to look over here at the fluoro, and then over here at C, back up at the screen to see something, and then back down at the patient. Where do you want the doctor's eyes the whole time? Right?
On the patient.
So I think in the position that they're in, I think that they got to be thinking about not just data and AI, and I know they are, but how do you make the experience beautiful? Why don't surgeons deserve that, right? Why don't surgeons deserve to have a much lower rate of getting cancer because of the technologies? Proprio, I'll go back to that again, because there's not exposure to radiation. Orthopedic surgeons actually suffer 8 times the rate of cancer. I didn't know that until recently, by the way, right? Think about that. Physicians deserve a better experience than that. And so when I think about the industry as a whole and what it needs to be thinking about, it's how can we really be thinking of ourselves more broadly, that we make our customers' day easier, because that can offer a hook. And that's how we get into these hospitals. With that, is it okay if I bring up just a little bit about how I talk to my technical investor friends about some of these as well? So I feel like I have 2 different conversations.
I'm trying to milk as much time with you as possible.
So when I'm talking to my medical device friends, I say what I've been saying about, hey, look, you need to be thinking about how you can make your business investable again. And AI opens a huge door to be able to do it, right? As I said, you've already lost the jobs, right? When I'm talking to my tech friends, I have a different conversation. And that's a little bit more around, we have to go, if you want to disrupt something, if you want to, think outside the box, first you need to know what's in the box. You have to know how it got to be in this place and how hard their challenge actually is. So I think that in fairness to the medical device industry, they have seen, I can name a couple of companies where they brought in a bunch of people from big tech and they said, look, you guys are slow and dumb. We're fast and richer than you. And so we're going to show you how it's done. And then they're like, oh, wow, this is hard. Healthcare is hard. I'm out of here. Right. And that has happened a lot. And so I think that part of the reason why the medical device industry has turned its nose up a little bit to the tech crowd is somewhat warranted. The past experience has not been proven in an industry where lives are at stake if you don't prove your case. So, if you want to disrupt something, you have to have respect for what you're disrupting. Famously, when Jeff Bezos came out with the Kindle, right? He had said, "Oh no, we approach this with it has to have everything a book does," right?
It's a great piece of technology, by the way. I love my
Great
Kindle.
piece of technology. I still use my Kindle because it feels like a book, right? But it went into it with not saying, "Oh, books are bad, paper," right? It said, "No, this is an experience people love." Likewise, we have to go into the medical device industry with disruption to understand why it's hard, and the different roles functions play. As I mentioned before, I gave the marketing example, in a medical device industry, because, the marketing officer isn't going to move the market, it's other physicians, right? A thought leading physician who says, "No, we must do it this way now," right? And so the marketing role is often a little bit more tactical, and they'll create these advisory boards, right? Building awareness at symposia and so forth and so on. Focus on, getting reimbursement and these sorts of functions, clinical marketing through publications, different function, right? However, very manual. And we have to think about solving the big pain point problems. An example of a company actually that did that was Viva Systems, right? Which made this, some of the simple solutions around routing content that we had to do. We did that manually. I would walk down the hall and show the attorney my piece of marketing. I would show the regulatory person that. And I literally spent my time walking around hallways begging for a signature. This is an example of how a tech company looks at that a little differently, right? So, I think we've really got to come back to thinking about the challenge they have and why, understanding who they have employed there and how they view their jobs, and approaching it from a position of respect.
I love that. And, I want to be mindful of your time, and I appreciate you spending time, especially remotely. Before you go, I have a couple rapid fire questions for you. You can take as long as you want, or you can answer them as quickly as you want. I'll make the first one easy, which is I think part of being an investor and venture capital is this ability to be a learning machine, right? Because you're evaluating companies and markets and everything. I'm wondering, for you, is there a book or two that you often recommend to other investors that may have had an influence on the way you think, your career, or anything like that?
So the book I wish I had at 25, at 35, for different reasons at various ages, is Tony Fadell's Build.
Oh, I haven't heard this book. Tony Fadell?
You haven't heard of his book? But
I have
read
not.
That book. So Tony Fadell,
I'm buying it right
now. The lead on creating the iPod at Apple, was part of General Magic in its earliest days with the start.
Throwback. A lot of people, I know General Magic. That was like a dream team, by the way.
There was the dream team. First job. Oh yeah, you should have Tony Fadell on just to talk about General Magic. Actually, that's a connection I should make too.
I would love that.
Amazing. And most recently, he of course was the founder of Nest, which he sold to Google. Nest as in the home thermostat. He really approaches it from a product perspective of the thermostat. Anybody who likes their thermostat at home, is it a beautiful experience? No. And then along came Nest, right? It's an elegant experience. So that's a book that I look at and say, wow, I wish I had this when I was getting a start in my career.
While talking, I just clicked the buy now, so it's already on its way for me.
There you go.
Small advice to founders, by the way, take this to heart. If you're trying to get into a fund or learn from an investor, I feel like investors often recommend these books. And I'll ask a founder, I'm like, oh, like investors actually a really big, big practitioner of high output management, right? By Andy Grove. Did you read that? No, I haven't. I'm like, why wouldn't you not do that? So anybody who's a founder who's listening, just buy that book now and read it. So before I go to my second question, any other books you recommend, or that you want to leave it on that one?
That's the biggest one. I know there are others. Some of the others that come to mind are a little bit more venture capitalist oriented and not tech founders, but the best one for entrepreneurs is Build. And the reason why is he points at how challenging the journey is and how you really need an investing partner. I know that at Recode Ventures, we believe this, Vishal and I believe this very strongly. You need to have somebody to come along with you on the journey that at those earliest stages, which are going to be in a position to help you be able to execute on this, it's the biggest challenge you're going to face. Another big point for founders, especially those building something in healthcare and the life sciences with AI, is your AI is great, but you have to come at this from, it's not that, I find a lot of entrepreneurs in the space, it's not that they're not solving a problem that exists for patients, right? Indeed, the way that you're treated in a hospital or how you are diagnosed is cumbersome and frustrating for patients. But you have to come at it from who is paying for your technology versus who's benefiting. And that's where the big challenges come in. Know at every step of the way how you're going to get paid, who's going to argue for you, how is it they interact with purchasing. If you're going to build a new market, how are you going to do that, right? Who is going to be your champion in the sale, right? If you can't tell me who it is that's going to buy your data package, then how do I know somebody's going to, products don't get sold, they get bought. So you have to be able to articulate that really well. And Tony does that very well in his book.
Love it.
So,
All right, last question for you before we let you
please.
go. So, tactically speaking, what's your best piece of advice to founders or entrepreneurs who are trying to raise money right now?
So I don't think it's a secret to anyone that the fundraising environment is challenging right now. And I think that what you need to do is really think about why the urgency is now for your company. Why it is that this opportunity is going to take off now, and why it is that an investor simply must include you. Is it that there is significant market traction that you're getting commercially? Is it that there is about to be a new favorable ruling for you? What is it that presents the urgency of now? And I think that really has to be top of mind. I think as well, it's important to remember that investors don't invest in products or technology, they invest in people. And I know that, especially at the early stages, but really all the way up through the Series B. After that, a little bit too, but then it becomes a little bit more of a financial exercise. The quality we look for is a lack of self-awareness. If you can demonstrate that you're self-aware and coachable and know what you are not in addition to what you are, that's something special. We have a couple of entrepreneurs like that right now. And I, every time I see them, I feel more energized. I see that they are, aware of, open to feedback, not necessarily to listen to everything I have to say, but they're eminently coachable. And I think part of the reason, frankly, that we're in this spot is because venture capitalists have made it this way. We take these people who, they went to great college X, right, where they were academically super top, and then they did 25 other things on the side, right? And then they went to graduate school where they got their PhD in something, and they're amazing. And they started a company, and they raised, some, $20 million seed round, right? And they said, look, Mom, I raised $20 million. There's a press release. This really famous guy is behind me and so forth. And then all of a sudden, one day, we say to them later, maybe you're not perfect in all these regards. And so when we drum them up quite this much, we're not being honest. So, I think entrepreneurs who have a reality check on the things they do and don't do well are real gems, and in addition to being students of their market. But it's somewhat our fault because we've constantly provided all of the positive reinforcement, bigger and bigger valuations, and now they can't raise money. And it's really hard to learn lessons that way, and we're seeing this left and right now, right? Demonstrating that self-awareness. Because when you come out of your PhD program in whatever, machine learning, you don't know about things like product management and regulatory affairs and managing and leading people and all of these complex skills. So, think about what part of the business you're really, really good at and what part of the business that you want coaching for, right? And find an investor who wants to support you in that and who you can be honest with and who will be honest right back at you, because that's a real relationship in a world full of false pretense.
I love that. Armen, thank you so much for coming on the show. You're definitely going to be a crowd favorite. For those who are listening, a couple things. One is like, please forward this on to an entrepreneur. We have a lot of great family offices, private investors who are listening to the show. If you're interested, go to recodeventures.com. I think you guys got a new website.
We do.
It looks
It's
great.
pretty and stuff.
Yeah.
There's some cool graphic thing going on. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, look, from a branding and marketing guy with an agency, really well done. Whoever did it for you guys, I loved it. Yeah, it looks really good.
Hook you up with them. Yes, we have 9 companies in our first portfolio. We actually just did 2 pre-seed companies last month. They're super exciting as well. I don't know if we've posted them yet. And we learned out of that too, right? Innovation in AI and healthcare, it's everywhere. I'm really excited by what we're seeing coming out of new entrepreneurs.
That's awesome. I love it. So for those who are interested, again, go to recodeventures.com. If you know of an LP, a family office, private investor, send them this episode so they can learn more about Armen and his fund. As always, I'm your host, Omar Khateeb. We're the #1 show for a reason, because you, the listener, don't forget to subscribe, give us those 5 stars, and again, share the knowledge, share this with somebody. Thank you, and we'll see you all next time. Thanks for checking out this episode. If you want to do me a big favor and join so many other people who have helped grow this podcast, take a second and look below. If you're on Apple, give us 5 stars and write a short review. If you're on Spotify, just give us 5 stars. And if you're on YouTube, hit the like button. And most importantly, if you can, subscribe. We release so many different episodes that you may miss. Be sure to subscribe and turn your notifications on. You get extra points with me if you subscribe across all 3 channels. Thank you so much. And if you felt like this episode helped you, send this to somebody who would really enjoy and appreciate it. Share and spread the love. We'll see you all next time.